Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to ancient Rome. Yes, that Rome, with all its marble columns, togas flapping in the breeze, and debates that could make even a spreadsheet look thrilling. But instead of gladiators or Julius Caesar getting dramatically betrayed again, tonight we're sinking into something earthier, something humbler, something turnipier? You arrive just as the Senate session is about to begin and the Grand Hall is abuzz. Not with war or treason or land reforms, but with a heated discussion about the city's most contested vegetable. Yep, turnips. You can smell them before you even take your seat. Somewhere in the back, a slave holding a basket of them shifts nervously. It's not his fault they've become this politically symbolic. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this place not because of swords or intrigue, but because you'd accidentally laugh out loud at the phrase root crop diplomacy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere special, let me know your location and the local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're seated on a backless bench made of polished oak, surrounded by a sea of murmuring senators in sandals. You're not quite sure how you got this VIP pass to the Curia Julia, but no one's questioning you. You're just that dreamlike. One senator stands, Marcus Terentius, whose voice always sounds like he's halfway between a nap and a sneeze, and he clears his throat dramatically. "Citizens of Rome," he drones, "we must consider the implications of replacing the state-subsidized beet ration with turnips." There is an audible gasp. A gasp! Over turnips! You glance to your right where a younger senator has actually brought a small wooden model of a turnip. He holds it aloft like a visual aid. The carving is exquisite, the commitment unhinged. As the debate unfolds, you learn that in Rome, turnips were not just food, they were symbols. A senator praising turnips might be seen as championing frugality and humble virtues. Opposing them? Maybe you're a man of taste. Or maybe you're just an elitist beet lover. Historians still argue whether these debates were more about class politics or genuine culinary preferences. But one thing is clear, Rome took its vegetables weirdly seriously. You try to follow the Latin, which drones on in polite monotone, but your attention drifts to the columns overhead. They're carved with scenes of Ceres, goddess of grain, and you wonder idly whether she ever gave a hoot about root vegetables. Probably not. She seems like more of a wheat girl. As the Senate chamber heats up, someone brings in pitchers of watered wine. It's lukewarm and kinda tastes like regret, but you sip anyway. It helps ease the awkwardness when one older senator dramatically stands, points a trembling finger, and bellows, "If we cannot agree on turnips, what hope have we for Rome?" That line will be quoted in 0 history books, but it definitely ends up on a sarcastic mosaic tile by someone's kitchen later. You sit quietly, listening, watching the dust swirl in the sunlight. One senator compares the turnip to the Roman people, resilient, rooted, not always pleasant, but essential. Another replies with a barely concealed smirk, yet some rot from the inside. Ooh, political vegetable shade. You begin to notice how deeply this debate reflects broader anxieties. The republic's transitioning, there's unrest, food scarcity looms in the provinces, and here, in this echoing hall, grown men yell about root crops because it's safer than yelling about the emperor. It's all very quietly chaotic. The sort of thing you'd fall asleep thinking about and wake up unsure whether it was a dream or an ancient political satire. A light rain starts to tap on the roof tiles. The sound merges with the rustling of togas and the dull thud of a senator accidentally dropping his wooden turnip prop. You're lulled by the monotony, by the droning vowels, by the sheer soothing absurdity of it all. At one point, a junior scribe dozes off and is gently nudged awake by his superior, not because he missed anything important, but because it's considered rude not to at least pretend to care about tuber allocation. You shift in your seat, blink slowly, the candles flicker. Someone opens a window. The scent of roasting chestnuts from a nearby stall drifts in. It doesn't mix well with the turnips, but it's oddly comforting. Eventually, Marcus Terentius concludes with a line you can't help but admire for its dramatic emptiness. And thus, the turnip becomes not just a meal, but a mirror. You'll carry that nonsense into your dreams.
The next morning, you shuffle groggily into one of Rome's bustling open-air markets, drawn not by hunger exactly, but by curiosity, and maybe the lingering scent of roasted chestnuts. The sun is barely up, yet the stalls are alive with shouting, laughter, and the unmistakable squelch of fresh produce being manhandled. Somewhere between a crate of olives and a sack of pickled dormice, you spot them. Turnips. Stacks and stacks of them. White and purple, smooth and knobbly, some still dusted with clumps of dirt like they were yanked out of the ground 10 minutes ago. You drift toward one particular vendor, a wiry man with a beard that looks like it's been trimmed using a rusty coin. He sees your wide-eyed stare and grins. "Ah, looking for the good stuff, eh?" he says, patting a turnip like it's a loyal dog. "Grew these myself, Tiber-fed. None of that aqueduct-grown nonsense." You pretend to nod knowledgeably, but he's already launching into a tale of how his great-grandmother once traded a single flawless turnip for a pair of goats and a ceremonial dagger. You're not sure if it's true or if he's even sober, but it's captivating in a sleepy, sideways kind of way. Around you, the market's chaos continues. Fishmongers slap their wares down with pride. Fabric sellers wave bolts of cloth like war banners. A bored child pokes a melon until it oozes. And amid it all, people argue about the price of turnips like their lives depend on it. Historians still argue whether this level of obsession came from scarcity, tradition, or just the Romans' deep need to argue about something. But one thing's clear. Turnips weren't just a side dish. They were an economy. You stroll past a woman carefully weighing turnips against a chunk of bronze stamped with the emperor's face. No scales, just eyeballing it with a confidence you deeply envy. Another man carries a basket of turnips balanced expertly on his head, zigzagging through the crowd while reciting love poetry to no one in particular. And then there's the tax collector's assistant, a pudgy youth with ink-stained fingers hovering nearby and scribbling notes. You overhear him muttering, 16 crates, 4 unpaid, possible smuggling. Smuggling of turnips! Welcome to the underbelly of Rome's vegetable black market. Probably not what you imagined when people said empire. You drift further into the market's heart, past rows of lentils, garlic, and more types of cheese than seems strictly necessary. One vendor is selling turnip leaves separately, claiming they ward off nightmares when worn in your sandals. You don't buy any, but you file that one away for future bedtime rituals. A mild argument breaks out between two older women over which region produces the sweetest turnips. One swears by Etrurian soil, the other by the volcanic richness of Campania. They look like they've been having this same argument since Cicero was in diapers. You pause at a quieter corner, where a small boy is sketching vegetables in the dirt with a stick. His father looks on proudly. He'll be a market inspector one day. You nod solemnly. A noble profession. Further down, a street performer juggles, what else? Turnips. 3 at once, then 4. The crowd claps politely, but not enthusiastically. You get the feeling Rome has seen a lot of turnip tricks. You pass a group of cooks from a local tavern, loudly comparing prices and arguing over whether pickling or roasting brings out the soul of the root. One of them insists on a controversial technique involving honey and sheep's milk. You shudder, and not in a good way. The market smells like citrus, sweat, and ambition. You're beginning to understand that in a world without TikTok or takeout apps, shopping was both necessity and performance. Every turnip touched, weighed, and argued over carried social weight. Were you practical, lavish, secretly foreign? You lean against a sun-warmed pillar and watch a young man try to impress a girl with a premium turnip. It doesn't go well. She's unimpressed. You're impressed by her standards. As you move to leave, a vendor calls after you, holding up a particularly squat specimen. For you, a lucky turnip. Keeps the Senate from finding your address. You take it with a nod, unsure whether it's a joke, a threat, or a weirdly specific charm. Either way, it's now yours. Warm, solid, and slightly pungent. A root-bound souvenir from the center of Rome's expected obsession. The sun rises higher, the shouts become more urgent, and you drift through it all like a cloud, bemused and calm. Just another sleepy wanderer lost in a world where root vegetables rule the streets.
You leave the market with your lucky turnip in tow, wandering through Rome's winding streets, still half lost in the chaos of root vegetable commerce. But now, you're heading toward a place quieter, cooler too, with marble colonnades and shaded gardens. Because today, you're about to witness something far more ridiculous than yesterday's Senate showdown. A dietary duel between turnips and beets. You arrive at the domus of a mid-tier senator named Gnaeus Fabius, a man known less for legislative brilliance and more for his extremely firm opinions on produce. His estate is charming in the way only Roman homes can be. Stone mosaics, little fountains burbling, and a faint smell of something overcooked. Maybe stew, maybe ambition. You're escorted through the atrium and into a peristyle garden where the senator is hosting what he calls a culinary symposium. Translation, 6 senators and a few hangers-on sit in a semicircle, sipping wine far too early in the day, ready to debate whether beets or turnips deserve the honor of being the empire's most noble root. Yes, this is actually happening. You take a seat beside a bored-looking philosopher who's sketching what appears to be a beet being attacked by a turnip with a sword. You nod approvingly. He winks. The first senator stands and begins his case for turnips. Versatile, resilient, the people's root, he intones solemnly. You can roast them, mash them, ferment them, a soldier's snack, a farmer's joy. His opponent rises, older, with beet-stained fingers and the energy of a man who has absolutely nothing to lose. The beet, he declares, is a jewel of the soil. It brings color to the dull Roman palate. It stains the hand, yes, but it also stains the soul with passion. A servant awkwardly places trays of both vegetables before the group, roasted, boiled, raw, and, regrettably, jellied. You sample each. The turnip mash is bland but comforting. The beet slices earthy with a side of regret. A few senators gag politely. The wine keeps flowing. The debate continues with increasing absurdity. Someone quotes Virgil to prove turnips were favored by the gods. Someone else cites a dream in which Minerva whispered, "Beets are for poets, not warriors." Historians still argue whether these kinds of food-based intellectual debates were real, symbolic, or just a socially acceptable way to procrastinate on actual politics. You glance toward the philosopher, who's now drawing an amphora filled with turnip juice. He mutters, "This will be my finest satire." You believe him. The duel gets rowdier. A young senator accidentally flips his tunic while gesturing too wildly, revealing a very poorly tattooed turnip near his thigh. Nobody mentions it. Everyone sees it. The host, Gnaeus, tries to steer things back with a round of historical trivia. He says, "Did you know that Emperor Tiberius once banned turnips from his personal estate because he claimed they made his dreams too vivid?" Is that true? Probably not, but everyone nods solemnly. You learn that during the Punic Wars, soldiers were rationed beets in winter and turnips in spring, not because of nutrition, but because one senator believed beet-colored hands inspired melancholy, while turnip breath made you braver. Practical? No. Bizarrely charming? Yes. The philosopher finally speaks. Is it not the mark of a decadent empire to assign moral value to salad? No one answers, mostly because they've moved on to arguing whether beet leaves count as a separate entity from the root when judging culinary worth. At some point, a small dog runs through the garden with a turnip in its mouth. You're not sure where it got it, but the moment is oddly symbolic. A brief reminder that no matter how serious the tone,
Rome's obsession with food borders on the absurd. A senator dramatically suggests planting both in alternating rows as a symbol of bipartisan unity. Another suggests adding carrots for chaos. Laughter ripples through the group like amphoras tipping slightly too far. The debate begins to fade, not because it's resolved, but because lunch is being served, and everyone knows you don't spoil your appetite with ideological tuber warfare. That's just good manners. You drift out of the garden, a little dizzied from wine, heat, and sheer vegetable absurdity. Somewhere in the distance, the philosopher is trying to rhyme legume with doom. And you? You're starting to realize Rome wasn't built in a day, but if it had been, someone probably would have used turnips as bricks.
You wipe a bit of stray beet juice from your tunic as you're ushered into the next phase of your Roman adventure. A private meal at the countryside villa of yet another senator, Lucilla Cornelia, a woman known not for oratory or warfare, but for her culinary eccentricities. The villa is a peaceful retreat tucked into the soft hills outside Rome, where lavender bushes sway gently and bees hum like a lazy chorus. The air is warm, scented with olive groves and sun-warmed stone, and you immediately feel like you're stepping into the kind of life no one ever mentions in military history books. No battles, just brunch. Lucilla greets you wearing a tunic patterned with embroidered vegetables. A bit on the nose, but you respect the commitment. She waves you toward an open triclinium, the outdoor dining space, where low couches invite you to recline with zero dignity and full belly. Her staff, precise and whisper quiet, begin serving what she proudly calls the 12 faces of the turnip. You don't ask. You just eat. First comes rapa crudum, raw turnip, sliced impossibly thin, served with a drizzle of vinegar and honey. Crisp, a bit angry, not a great start. Then rapa toastum, roasted with sprigs of rosemary. Better, aromatic, almost huggable in a weirdly vegetal way. You nod thoughtfully as Lucilla watches for your reaction with the intensity of a gladiator sizing up a lion. She's deeply proud of this menu, and frankly, it's the most attention a root has received since that senatorial walkout you're still trying to emotionally process. As you chew your way through turnip fritters, turnip-stuffed dates, questionable, and a particularly ambitious turnip puree layered in a terrine-like geological strata, Lucilla regales you with the cultural history of the turnip. Did you know, she says, that in early Roman myth, turnips were believed to grow where Mercury's footsteps touched the earth? That's probably nonsense, she adds, but a poet once mentioned it, and no one had the courage to disagree. You sip watered wine as she tells you that during Augustus's reign, a noble tried to impress visiting dignitaries from Persia by serving only turnip dishes. They were not impressed, she shrugs, but the goats ate well that night. Historians still argue whether elite turnip feasts were a show of frugality, absurd wealth, or simply a culinary dare gone too far. The answer seems to be all of the above. Halfway through the meal, a slave carries out a bowl of turnip pearls, tiny boiled root bits rolled in powdered bay leaf and salt. Lucilla explains that they're considered aphrodisiacs by some, but mostly just give you gas. She says this while maintaining perfect eye contact. You choke slightly on your wine. Outside, peacocks strut through the garden. One of them grabs a discarded turnip fritter and runs off. The symbolism is not lost on you. Rome may be an empire, but the birds still steal the show. Lucilla continues, Pliny the Elder said turnips were best stored in clay pots beneath the earth, and that eating too many in one sitting would make you sleepy. She gestures vaguely at your reclining form. Evidence seems to support that. Indeed, you're beginning to feel the heavy comfort of digesting 12 types of starch in the sun. Your final course is dulcis rapa, a dessert of candied turnip slivers soaked in fermented grape must. It's better than expected, sort of, like if a potato married a raisin and had regrets. But you chew dutifully, and Lucilla beams. A chorus of cicadas buzz in the heat, blending with the clink of silverware and the soft murmur of afternoon gossip. One guest is speculating that a neighboring senator is growing oversized turnips using imported Egyptian fertilizer. Scandalous if true, laughable if false, delightful either way. You notice a servant bringing out a small bust carved entirely from dried turnip root. It's disturbingly lifelike. Supposedly, it's a likeness of Lucilla's grandfather, who believed turnips warded off evil spirits when placed at doorways. Or, as Lucilla puts it, he was mad, but in a stylish way. The sun shifts lower. Shadows stretch across the tiles. A gentle breeze rustles through the olive trees, stirring the scent of rosemary and roasted roots. And you recline deeper, letting the absurd opulence of Rome's vegetable aristocracy wash over you like warm honeyed vinegar. You have eaten 12 turnip dishes, heard 3 possibly apocryphal vegetable legends, watched a peacock commit petty theft, and now you feel like you've aged 10 years, but in a relaxed, slightly bloated way. And just as you begin to drift, Lucilla leans over and says, in the softest whisper, "Wait until you try my pickled radish collection. You will not survive that meal, but that's tomorrow's problem."
You wake slowly the next day in a guest room at Lucilla's villa, still digesting what must be enough fiber to power a Roman chariot across Gaul. The birds are already awake, gossiping in the trees. The servants are beginning their quiet, practiced rustle. And you, dear traveler, are about to embark on a journey through time and class, all through the life cycle of a turnip. Because today we examine the curious tale of how turnips, once the pride of Roman elite tables, slowly slipped into culinary obscurity, a fall from grace more tragic than Brutus. You shuffle to the garden and sip watered wine that someone has kindly left near your cot. Across the gravel path, a young servant girl is feeding leftover turnip peels to goats. It's a symbolic start, really. In Rome's earlier Republic years, the turnip was a mark of wealth. Why? Because only the rich could afford the time and servants to prepare it the right way. Boiled with herbs, roasted in ash, even pickled in fish sauce if you were feeling adventurous or sadistic. Preparing turnips in 6 different styles just to show off your culinary philosophy was a flex. But by the early empire, as Rome ballooned in size and began importing all manner of spices, grains, and delicacies from across Africa, Asia, and the Near East, the humble turnip started losing its prestige. You wander into the villa's kitchen, less a room and more a smoky open-air hive of activity. There you hear a cook mutter, "Another turnip dish? What are we, Etruscan peasants?" She doesn't know you're listening. You're invisible in these stories. You exist only to observe and chuckle. The problem, you learn, is that turnips became too available. The fertile regions of Gaul and Hispania overproduced them. Suddenly, what was once a sign of careful gardening and luxurious cooking time became a bland, predictable food associated with rural living and lower classes. Historians still argue whether the shift was purely agricultural or also social. Was it fashion, economics, a rebellion against root-based monotony? You stroll outside again, crunching gravel underfoot, and recall a passage Lucilla quoted yesterday. A Roman playwright once joked, "You can judge a man's taste by what he pretends to enjoy when a turnip is placed before him." Harsh. Some writers in the 2nd century CE even began using turnip eater as a mild insult. Not vulgar, not obscene, just a quiet jab at rustic simplicity, the kind that would ruin your Senate aspirations or get you seated at the boring end of a feast. In the city, new flavors took over. Dates from Carthage, cinnamon from India, silphium, briefly, tragically, and rare fish paste that would make a modern nutritionist cry. Even carrots, which once a second-tier vegetable, began to climb the ranks, thanks to their flashier color and diplomatic neutrality. You pause near a villa wall and trace your fingers along a fading fresco depicting, yes, a banquet scene. There's roast peacock, skewers of fig, and somewhere near the edge, a small sad dish of mashed turnip, barely painted in, faded both literally and metaphorically. Later that day, you accompany one of Lucilla's overseers to a neighboring estate where a symposium is underway on flavor stratification in rural cuisine. It's exactly as absurd as it sounds. One speaker, a minor noble with far too many rings, claims that turnips never had value but were elevated by a republic desperate to romanticize farming. Another disagrees, arguing that turnips represented the honest struggle of the Roman citizen before decadence spoiled our palates. You just sip your wine, slowly. Someone else chimes in, accusing turnips of being culinarily foot-flodded, whatever that means. At one point, a surprisingly well-dressed merchant stands and passionately defends the turnip as an emblem of domestic resilience. His words are stirring, and you briefly consider clapping until he ends his speech with a free sample of turnip paste facial cream that he's trying to launch as a new beauty trend. The crowd disperses in mild confusion. As dusk falls, you sit with a few villa staff by the servants' quarters sharing leftover barley cakes and cheese. They laugh when you ask about turnips. Only thing they're good for, says one, is stuffing in your tunic to look fatter in winter. Everyone laughs. Someone throws a peel into the fire. In the distance, a senator's voice echoes faintly through the hills, probably rehearsing some deeply unnecessary speech. The goats bleat. Someone's washing vegetables in a wooden basin. You lie back on a sun-warmed stone bench and let it all blur together. The fall of a vegetable dynasty, the weight of culinary fashion, the fleeting status of something grown underground. It's almost poetic if you squint, or maybe it's just dinner fatigue. Either way, you close your eyes to the sound of a turnip sizzling over coals and drift off with one last thought. At least it's not beets.
You wake the next morning to the distant thud of someone slicing vegetables. Turnips, again, no doubt, and the soft rumble of Roman gossip wafting through open windows. As you rise and wrap yourself in a borrowed linen tunic, you realize you've wandered deep into a question no modern history book ever truly prepared you for. Why are Romans so emotionally invested in root vegetables? Today, you'll uncover one of the weirder layers of that obsession, not through politics or cuisine, but through poetry, dreams, and strangely sensual metaphors. Because it turns out, in ancient Rome, turnips weren't just food. They were symbols of fertility, humility, absurdity, and on one uncomfortable occasion, something that probably shouldn't be discussed around children. You join a small reading circle in a corner of Lucilla's villa garden. It's just past breakfast, and a few educated guests are gathering to share their latest literary musings. One elderly rhetorician is reciting passages from his newest work, Elegies to Rooted Things. It is somehow worse and better than it sounds. He opens with a lament about how the turnip, humble of root and pale of skin, mirrors the Roman soul, bland when raw, bitter when bruised, but noble when fire-tested. You sip your watered wine and try not to smile too much. The others nod solemnly. Then someone else stands to read a piece about a woman who dreams of turnips growing beneath her bed, a sign, he explains, of repressed longing. You blink slowly. Everyone accepts this without question. You learn that in early Roman augury, yes, the practice of reading signs and omens, dreaming of vegetables had meaning. A turnip in a dream could mean prosperity or disappointment, depending on whether it was firm. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were widely believed or the product of creative sleep-deprived poets hoping to get attention at dinner parties. Of course, none of this stays purely symbolic. Roman playwrights adored using vegetables in their insults. To call someone a boiled turnip was to imply they were dull and spineless. Pickled turnip, on the other hand, meant someone who'd been emotionally compromised. whatever that meant. Slang was ambiguous. You overhear a dramatic reading of a letter supposedly written by a jilted lover, where he compares his heartbreak to a turnip forgotten in the sun, which honestly does evoke a certain dry bitterness. In a shady corner of the garden, you find a small shrine. At its base, not coins, not flowers, but yes, several carefully arranged turnips, most carved with little faces or messages. One simply says, "For luck." A guest explains that some Romans believed gifting a turnip to Jupiter during certain festivals could bring fertile harvests, or fertility of the more personal kind. The logic is murky, but hey, people today still throw coins into fountains. Who are we to judge? You wander next into a side room where a group is discussing Roman theater. One playwright, known only as Lardius the Unambitious, apparently once penned an entire comedic tragedy centered on a cursed turnip that caused political scandal, love triangles, and the collapse of a minor aqueduct. The play was banned for vegetable slander, but it toured the provinces anyway. You're told it was wildly popular in Gaul. Historians, again, debate whether these stories reflected genuine belief or were part of a broader Roman tendency to turn everything into moral lessons disguised as snack commentary. You pause by a low stone bench and watch as a tutor teaches his student a passage from Horace. He says, "Note the metaphor." He taps the wax tablet. "The buried root is not just agriculture. It's about temptation." The student groans. You sympathize. Later, you speak with a mosaic artisan who shows you a work-in-progress piece, a mythological scene reimagined with vegetables. Mars is a radish, Venus an artichoke, and in the corner, Mercury, holding a turnip like a scroll. Satire, the artist says with a wink, for the bathhouse lobby. Rich people love this stuff. The sun rises higher, bees drone lazily. Somewhere, a poet is debating whether the turnip represents Roman discipline or Roman denial. You begin to wonder if this is how it always starts. The overthinking, the layers of meaning, the emotional projection onto whatever's on your plate. Because in Rome, even the blandest vegetable becomes a canvas for philosophy, puns, and veiled insults. A woman passes you carrying a basket of oddly shaped turnips, each one tied with a ribbon. She explains, wedding gifts, symbol of grounded love, or maybe a warning. Depends on the couple. You thank her and move along, feeling the weight of root-based metaphor settle gently in your mind. As the light softens and afternoon sleepiness sets in, you find a quiet spot under a fig tree and lie down. A turnip isn't just a turnip anymore. It's a mirror, a joke, a whispered prayer, a passive-aggressive poem. It's Roman.
The next morning, you wake to the faint clink of ceramic jars and the earthy aroma of crushed herbs. A new chapter in your turnip-laced Roman odyssey begins, not in the kitchens or Senate chambers, but in a quieter, more pungent corner of civilization, the apothecary. You find yourself in a dim, cool room attached to a local physician's house. Shelves line the walls, sagging under the weight of terracotta vessels labeled in smudged Latin. There are jars of dried rose petals, powdered lizard, thistle seed, and, of course, shriveled turnip slices. Your guide today is Sabinus, a man whose robe is stained with things you choose not to identify. He greets you with the low, gravelly tone of someone who spent decades whispering confidently about treatments that may or may not actually work. Turnips, he says, waving a hand as though unveiling a masterpiece, are vastly underappreciated in the art of healing. You nod. At this point, of course they are. He leads you to a low bench, sits beside you, and begins demonstrating Roman remedies featuring your new favorite root vegetable. First there's rapa cataplasma, a poultice made from mashed turnips, vinegar, and occasionally fish brine. Good for boils, he says,
or heartbreak if applied correctly. You blink. He doesn't elaborate. Then there's rapa ex decoctio, turnip boiled into a thick sludge, drunk warm to soothe the stomach. You sip politely and experience what could be called a deep intestinal dialogue. He dabs turnip mash on a wax figurine and says it's a charm against headaches, though only if you chant the right insult at it. The charm, not the headache. He's fuzzy on the specifics. Historians still argue whether Roman turnip medicine was sincerely believed or merely tolerated in the absence of anything better. Some writings suggest it helped with coughs, joint pain, even insomnia, though given the taste, that last one might just be emotional withdrawal. You drift through the room fingering scrolls that outline treatments involving turnip smoke inhalation, turnip seed oil for baldness, and one deeply unfortunate suggestion that inserting roasted turnip slices into your sandals could cure foot melancholy. In one corner, a young apprentice is crushing dried turnip peels with a mortar and pestle. "Love potion," she says with a wink, "for when you want them to cry and sneeze during the date." You take a deep breath of the room, pungent, herbal, with undertones of desperation, and reflect on how little separates medicine from superstition in this world. But then again, is modern cold remedy really so different from drink this root and hope? Outside, you follow Sabinus to his tiny medicinal garden. It's a haphazard mix of herbs, weeds, and precisely 6 thriving turnip plants. He gestures at them proudly. Each with its own personality, he claims. You're afraid to ask what he means. He picks one and slices it open with a curved bronze knife. "This one," he says gravely, "is for clarity of mind. You eat it slowly, in silence, while facing east. You ask what happens if you face west." He shudders theatrically. "Only owls know." One scroll he shows you includes a bizarre note. "A turnip placed under the tongue before a debate will grant victory, or at least indigestion." You imagine senators stuffing root slices in their cheeks like squirrels before public speaking. The image lingers in your brain like a turnip burp. Sabinus shares a story of a noblewoman who smeared fermented turnip mash on her face nightly in hopes of eternal youth. She died at 37, but with very firm cheeks, he shrugs. Then he gestures to a small, soot-darkened shelf marked Emergency Cures. Among the jars is one labeled simply Ultimum Rapa. He leans in conspiratorially. Boiled, mashed, mixed with goat tears and fig sap. Administered at twilight. Cures everything or nothing. I've never tried it. You suspect he's joking. You also suspect he's not. A small bell rings, and a hunched farmer enters complaining of phantom goose bites. Sabinus nods solemnly and hands him a packet of dried turnip peel wrapped in linen. The man leaves satisfied. You leave confused. You stroll out under a wide Roman sky, your tunic catching the soft breeze, and you realize, in this world, the line between wisdom and whimsy is thinner than a turnip slice. A root may not cure a fever, but it might comfort the soul, or at least make you laugh softly in disbelief. The birds chirrup, the air smells like thyme and charcoal. Somewhere behind you, Sabinus is explaining to another patient how turnip salve might attract fewer flies than garlic balm. Might. And you're walking lighter. Maybe it's the potion. Maybe it's the absurdity. Or maybe you simply accepted that in ancient Rome, even medicine comes with garnish.
Later that week, though time has lost all meaning in this sun-drenched, root-obsessed dreamscape, you find yourself once again in the Curia Julia. This time, the chamber feels more tense than absurd. Senators are hunched forward. Scribes are scribbling faster than usual. The air is stuffier, tinged with the distinct scent of nervous sweat and boiled vegetables. You've arrived just in time for the infamous fiscal root debate, the day turnips and their modest price fluctuations almost brought the Roman Senate to its collective knees. The issue at hand? Whether to include turnips in the next round of price-fixing edicts meant to control inflation and appease the plebeians. Yes, turnip regulation. It's happening. A voice rises. A junior senator named Tullus Virgilianus. He is young, ambitious, and has what you can only describe as profound root energy.
He claims that the overproduction of turnips in certain provinces is tanking grain prices and undermining Rome's dignity. "We must protect our farmers from this tuber glut," he insists, dramatically holding up a slightly bruised turnip as if it were a bleeding heart. There are murmurs, some nods, one audible snore. Then comes the rebuttal from Senator Calvasius, a man who has built his entire political brand on stability through vegetables. He stands slowly, clears his throat with a gravity usually reserved for eulogies, and begins. "Gentlemen, Rome has stood for centuries. We have faced invasions, plagues, and famine, but never, never have we trembled before a root crop." You might expect applause. You get silence and one loud sneeze from the balcony. Calvasius continues. He argues that turnips, being reliable, low maintenance, and not prone to dramatic weather-based price swings, are the ideal food to anchor an empire's fiscal policy. "If anything," he says, raising his eyebrows for effect, "they should be our monetary unit." Someone gasps, probably sarcastically. You sit very still, half awake, half stunned that these grown men, draped in silk, armed with oratorical training, and tasked with managing one of history's great empires, are passionately arguing about root vegetable economics. Historians still argue whether this event was a symptom of political stagnation or a clever distraction from more serious unrest in the provinces. But there's no doubt, that day the Curia was abuzz with Rappa rage. Things spiral from there. One senator suggests a turnip tithe on wealthy estates to help feed the urban poor. Another proposes a root exchange, where surplus turnips can be swapped for lesser-known legumes. A third, clearly not paying attention, tries to introduce a motion about naval funding and is promptly shouted down with chants of, "Not today, Gaius!" And then comes the walkout. It's subtle at first. One senator simply stands, mutters something about root tyranny, and exits. Another follows. Soon, a small wave of sandal slaps echoes down the marbled hallway. By the end of the session, nearly a third of the Senate has left in protest, not necessarily against the turnips, but against the idea that they should matter this much. Those who remain stay seated in awkward silence. One senator nervously peels a turnip with his stylus. Another just stares into space, mouthing the phrase, "tuber economy," like it's a curse. Eventually, the meeting adjourns with no decision, no edict, just confusion and indigestion. You step out into the forum as the sun begins to set, washing the city in gold and fatigue. A few senators huddle near the fountains, whispering about what just happened, while others make hasty retreats to bathhouses and wine shops. The pigeons seem unbothered. Later that evening, you attend a dinner party where the debate is still smoldering. Guests reenact the speech about monetary root crops with exaggerated flair. One woman claims her uncle predicted this tuber apocalypse years ago. Another says she's investing in beets now just in case. You sip your wine and watch the firelight flicker across polished tiles. The food is simple tonight: bread, cheese, olives, but a small bowl of roasted turnips appears, as if in tribute. No one eats them. They just sit there, steaming gently like a topic too fresh to touch. Somewhere, a poet is already composing an ode to the walkout. Someone else is sketching a political cartoon involving turnips with laurel wreaths. The city hums with quiet laughter and even quieter worry. You leave the party and walk through the cool streets, wrapped in night air and the distant echoes of absurd policy. Rome remains an empire, but one that, for a single afternoon, was nearly undone by a vegetable most people can't describe without squinting. You pause at a quiet fountain and whisper, "Maybe we are all just slightly bruised turnips." And in that moment, you might be right.
You wake with sore legs, stiff shoulders, and a vague memory of the Senate nearly collapsing over price-controlled vegetables. Nothing like political chaos to lull you into a deep, dreamless sleep. But today's journey is more grounded, literally, because now it's time to get your hands dirty, figuratively of course, as you spend a day on a Roman villa farm, learning how the empire's favorite, or at least most controversial, root was actually grown. The villa belongs to a minor noble, absent today on urgent business, which probably means avoiding chores. So you trail behind a steward named Marius, whose sun-worn tunic and permanent squint tell you he's the one keeping this place alive. He points to a patch of soil that looks, frankly, unimpressive. Dry, uneven, a few scraggly weeds poking through. This, he says, is where we grow greatness. You squint too, trying to see the turnip majesty. It looks like dirt. But then he waves over a group of laborers. Enslaved, mostly, though you notice a few free workers paid in food or the promise of future debt forgiveness. They move with practiced rhythm, tilling, planting, watering. No speeches, no symbolism, just sweat and efficiency. Marius explains the process. We plant the seeds in early autumn. Cold air makes them sweeter. Sun makes them stubborn. He chuckles. Like senators, but useful. You trail the workers down a neat row where tiny green tufts are just beginning to peek through. The soil smells rich, damp, and oddly comforting. You crouch, running your fingers along the surface. There's a strange reverence here, not dramatic, just practical. These people rely on these roots. Nearby, a boy, no older than 12, is filling a basket with the last of last season's harvest. He hums a tune you don't recognize. Later you learn it's a field song, a rhythmic chant designed to match the pace of hoe and hand. Not grand enough for Roman poetry, but catchy enough to stick in your head all day. Marius hands you a spade. Go on, pull one up. You hesitate, then dig gently around the base of a leafy stalk. The earth gives way, and soon you're holding your very own Roman turnip. It's lumpy, misshapen. Dirt clings to its crevices like secrets. You feel strangely proud. Ugly ones taste best. The pretty ones are liars. You laugh. He doesn't. As you follow the day's rhythm, you learn how the fields are rotated. Turnips help aerate the soil. Their roots break it up, leave room for grains or beans later. They're not just food, they're infrastructure. You pass a small shrine at the field's edge, decorated with garlands and offerings, mostly bread, flowers, and, of course, a perfectly placed turnip. To Tellus, earth goddess. We leave her something nice, she gives us fewer rocks. Historians still argue whether this kind of field worship was sincere belief or just hedging bets. Either way, the farmers don't take chances. Later, you join the workers under a lean-to for their midday break. The meal is simple: porridge, olives, and slices of roasted turnip drizzled with oil. It's warm, soft, and more satisfying than it has any right to be. Someone passes you a fig. You offer half your turnip in return. The trade is accepted with a nod. One man, older and missing a few teeth, tells you he once saw a turnip so large that it had to be carried by 2 mules. He said the senator carved it into a bust of himself. Didn't look worse than the real thing. The others laughed quietly, glancing around to make sure no one important is listening. Back in the fields, a girl teaches you how to check ripeness by squeezing the base gently. Soft is bad, squishy means worms. You want firm, but not too firm. It's a delicate science, like diplomacy but with dirt. You see how the fields change color in rows. Dark green where they have been watered, pale where they wait. The sun shifts overhead, casting long shadows that make each turnip plant look strangely heroic. Or maybe you're just a little sun-drunk. In one corner of the field, a worker paints numbers on clay pots filled with seedlings. It's part of an experiment, trying out Greek fertilizing methods with composted grape skins. Might make them taste like wine, he jokes, or socks. As the day ends, Marius hands you a sack with a few turnips inside. He says, "You earned these. And your fingernails." You look down. They're caked in dirt. You don't mind. The workers head back toward the villa, laughing, singing, sharing news about the city. You hang back, watching the field. It's just rows of leaves, really. But each one is a quiet promise. Food, trade, medicine, a speech, a metaphor. Rome's greatness wasn't built on marble alone. It was planted, tended, pulled from the ground by hands that never made the history books. You shoulder your sack of turnips and walk slowly back to the villa, dust rising at your heels. And somewhere deep inside, you feel a little more rooted.
The farm dust still clings to your sandals when you arrive back in the city, just in time for Saturnalia. It's the one time of year when Romans throw off their stoic dignity, their class structures, and apparently their aversions to turnip-based comedy. Because here, in the middle of Rome's rowdiest festival, the humble root makes its silliest appearance yet, as a party gag gift. You wander through decorated streets where garlands hang from windows, people wear brightly colored clothing, and someone, not even pretending to be sober, is singing a ballad about a lovesick goose. Everywhere you look, order has turned deliciously upside down. Masters serve slaves, senators wear floppy hats, and absolutely no one is taking themselves seriously. You're invited to a Saturnalia feast by a merchant family who greet you with a tunic embroidered with dancing pigs. A good sign. You're handed a goblet of watered wine and a strange little parcel wrapped in linen. Gift exchange, they say with a grin. You open it to find, naturally, a turnip, painted gold and glued with tiny seashells. It sparkles with low-budget charm. You thank them as solemnly as you can manage. Turns out, this is a tradition. Gag gifts, often edible, always ridiculous. A roasted mouse with a bow tie, a clay foot, and yes, the classic decorated turnip, which never fails to earn a groan and a chuckle. It's the Saturnalia equivalent of a bad office Secret Santa gift. Reliable, pointless, weirdly beloved. You recline at the banquet table while a slave-turned-king of Saturnalia bangs a spoon on a bowl and announces, "All speeches must be sung tonight." Someone begins composing a hymn about pickled onions. You join the chorus. The meal is chaotic but delightful. Between courses of sausages, honey cakes, and something that might have once been a squid, a platter of roasted turnips is presented, not with reverence, but with flair. A servant places a turnip on a silver pedestal and announces, "For our emperor's nose." Someone laughs so hard, they spilled wine on the fresco. You begin to notice a pattern. Each guest is quietly trying to outdo the others in turnip absurdity. One person juggles 3 roasted ones and drops them all. Another uses a carved turnip as a goblet. A child holds up a tiny one and says it looks like their father's head. The room erupts. Historians still argue whether this ritual mocking of the turnip was a satire of excess or just an excuse to play with food. But during Saturnalia, no one asks too many questions. The merchant leans in and tells you a local legend. Years ago, a senator received a turnip filled with pebbles. Confused, he boiled it anyway and nearly broke his tooth. The sender's message? You swallow whatever you're handed. Classic Roman shade. You sip warm spiced wine as a poet performs an impromptu epic titled The Tragic Tale of Sir Turnippus, who dreamed of becoming a beet but was cruelly boiled into soup. It's terrible. It's perfect. Later, you watch a mock tribunal where guests accuse one another of turnip crimes. One man is guilty of hoarding them, another of under-seasoning. The penalties are invented on the spot. Reciting embarrassing poems, singing falsetto, or wearing a necklace of garlic. There's music, pipes and tambourines, and a flute player who is way into it. There's dancing, wild, clumsy, joyous. You join in until someone offers you a slice of turnip cake and you decide to sit down before you start seeing double. You lounge near a brazier as laughter floats through the room like incense. You overhear 2 older women arguing whether Saturnalia turnips should be peeled before painting. One insists yes. The other says only a fool peels a comedy turnip. You nod to both. You've learned.
Later, as the feast winds down and the guests begin their slow, swaying departures, you're handed one last gift, a turnip carved with your face. Badly, but endearingly. The merchant winks, to remember your role in tonight's chaos. You step out into the crisp night air, cheeks flushed, feet aching. The stars shimmer above the rooftops. Somewhere, someone is still singing about the goose. And in your hands, a slightly charred, grinning vegetable effigy. You walk home under garlands and torchlight, your heart full of cheap wine and cheaper jokes. You've seen the Roman state, the Roman soil, and now the Roman soul, all in turnip form. And somehow, this root, the one they joke about, roast, argue over, gift, and immortalize in verse, feels more Roman than the Colosseum. You fall asleep to the faint sound of tambourines, clutching your carved turnip like a pillow of memory. And if you dream tonight, you hope it's of laughter, firelight, and the noble absurdity of Saturnalia.
A few days pass, and the city begins to sober up from its Saturnalia hangover. Garlands wilt, glittering turnip art quietly composts behind villas. But one thing still lingers in the air. An ongoing, quiet grumble that hums beneath the streets like a distant drum. Taxes. Specifically, root vegetable taxes. Yes, dear traveler, welcome to the thrilling world of ancient Roman bureaucracy, where even turnips get their own scrolls, tables, and semi-unreadable forms. You find yourself trailing a small entourage of tax officials through the Subura district, Rome's densely packed, chaotic heart. The kind of place where street vendors shout about eels, children chase goats, and public graffiti includes very unkind reviews of last week's oratory. The officials, dressed in stiff tunics and frowns, stop at each shop recording quantities, weights, and prices. They pause at a produce stall overflowing with turnips, each one stacked like little white helmets. 3 bundles, untaxed, one clerk mutters, adjusting his wax tablet. Declare or confiscate. The vendor, a leathery woman with sharp elbows and sharper words, glares. They're personal turnips for family stews. There is an awkward silence. One official sighs. We've heard that before. You continue along as they argue. Turns out the empire, in its endless appetite for coin, had recently proposed a minor grain supplement tax. But here's the twist. In regions where grains were scarce or expensive, turnips were often substituted. So, as turnips became more essential, Rome began eyeing them for revenue. One tax reformer, Publius Somthingus, had famously proposed a root levy, which critics mockingly nicknamed Rapa Romana. The law never passed fully, but remnants of it linger. Merchants now must declare their non-grain edibles if sold above a certain weight. It's as exciting as it sounds. Historians still argue whether this obscure policy had any actual economic effect, or if it simply created a wave of produce-based resentment that led to increased hoarding and underground vegetable markets. Yes, underground turnip trade, again. You turn a corner and stumble upon a quiet courtyard where a few women are peeling turnips in the shade. One of them waves you over and whispers, "We don't sell these. We share them." She grins conspiratorially. No tax on friendship. It's hard to tell if she's joking or just tired. You visit a grain dole distribution center where poor citizens queue for their monthly rations. You'd expect only bread and flour, but there's a sack labeled root surplus. Inside, turnips, small, wrinkled, barely edible. Still better than nothing. A man near the front of the line tells you he once tried to trade 3 turnips for a cup of wine. The wine was bad, he shrugs, but at least the turnips had character. Nearby, a scribe sits hunched over a scroll, tallying how many edible units of root vegetables have been given out this month. He looks up wearily. They grow fast, spoil slower, and nobody riots over a missing turnip. Yet. He peeks over his shoulder. The ledger is astonishingly detailed. There are notes like, family of 5, 3 turnips, 2 garlics. Veteran with gout, bonus beet. Unclear request, possibly rutabaga.
and at the bottom, missing turnips, possibly consumed by goat. That line is underlined twice. Later that day, you attend a public forum where a minor magistrate is addressing a small crowd about the future of root revenue. The speech is as dry as stale barley, but one phrase stands out. If we can count them, we can coin them. A few citizens boo. A tomato flies. Ironically, not a turnip. The speaker continues. Vegetable valuation is key to imperial longevity. He shouted down again. A boy starts chanting, no roots, no rules. No one joined him, but he keeps going. As you drift away, a baker sidles up and mutters, they tax the bread, they tax the oven, now they'll tax the soup. He hands you a small roll stuffed with what is definitely mashed turnip. Tell no one. You stroll past a graffiti wall where someone has drawn a giant turnip labeled census. It's being stomped by a sandal. Satire is alive and well. You end the day near the Tiber River, where a group of fishermen trade their morning catch for, you guessed it, baskets of turnips. The fish stink less, but the roots don't bite back, one laughs. You sit on a stone bench and watch Rome's daily trade unwind. Coins, fish, bread, turnips, all moving in quiet, calculated circles. It's easy to forget how much power flows through these mundane exchanges. And tonight, as the sun dips low and the olive trees cast long shadows over cobblestones, you realize something. Taxes may come for all things, but humor, barter, and the stubborn endurance of the Roman citizen, those remain untaxed for now.
Today, you follow the scent of sweat, leather, and boiled vegetables, not toward a market or a banquet, but toward a Roman military encampment just outside the city walls. It's orderly, square, surrounded by ditches and ramparts. Inside, rows of tents, clanking armor, and somewhere nearby, a cook angrily swearing at a turnip that refuses to soften. You've arrived on stew day. Again. Welcome to the world of military rations, where Roman legions conquer the known world fueled by discipline, bread, and for reasons no soldier fully understands, an endless supply of turnips. You duck under a tent flap and sit beside a few legionaries who are gathered around a dull, bubbling pot. The stew looks more gray than brown. Someone prods it with a spear tip. Still alive, he mutters. A centurion strides by, sniffing the air. Make it thicker, he barks. It needs to last till tomorrow. You're handed a wooden bowl. It's steaming, hearty, and vaguely vegetal. The first bite confirms what you already suspect. Mostly turnips, maybe a hint of lentils, definitely no meat. A soldier beside you grins. This'll put hair on your goat. You sip carefully and listen as the men complain. Not about the weather, not about marching 20 miles yesterday, but about the stew. Too bitter, says one. Too soft, says another. Too much like last week, says everyone. Historians still argue whether Roman soldiers actually hated turnips or if it was just a socially acceptable thing to grumble about, like sand in your sandals or centurions with loud voices. One grizzled veteran named Titus claims he once ate nothing but turnip mash for 7 days straight during the siege of Numantia. Started dreaming in purple and white, he says. My wife said I smelled like disappointment. He seems proud of this. The cook, Marcia, a former tavern chef now attached to the 6th Legion, tells you, the problem's not the turnip, it's only the turnip. Give me leeks, garlic, anything, and I can make magic. But this, she gestures to the pot, this is just surrender in a bowl. You help stir for a bit and notice how the stew resists. It's clinging to the bottom like it's given up. You understand its mood. Later, a supply officer explains that turnips are just practical. They grow fast, store well, don't spoil in transit, and if you mash them, they can stretch any ration 5 days longer. We once stuffed turnip mash inside dried goat stomachs, he says, called it a travel pie. You nod slowly,
and try not to gag. You wander past a row of tents where soldiers are dicing turnips with varying levels of enthusiasm. One claims he can carve a miniature bust of Emperor Hadrian in 5 minutes. You watch. It looks more like a sad thumb, but you clap anyway. In another tent, 2 men are playing dice for the last slice of pickled turnip. The stakes are high. The room smells intense. You stumble into the quartermaster's area where crates labeled non-essential vegetables sit untouched. Carrots, parsnips, a single wilted cabbage. No one wants to risk the paperwork to access them. But turnips, always available, always expected, always unwelcome. One scroll you glance at lists official daily rations for a marching unit. Grain, 1 pound. Wine, half a liter. Salt, small pinch. Turnip, infinite, apparently. You hear whispers that some legionaries have developed elaborate secret recipes, adding river mud for flavor, roasting turnips over open flame until they're crispy despair, even fermenting them with leftover wine dregs. None are officially sanctioned, all are fiercely guarded. You're invited to a night gathering where soldiers sing marching songs, polish their gear, and pass around turnip liqueur. It tastes like betrayal. But it burns, and it's warm, and they toast with it anyway. A young soldier from Hispania tells you he never saw a turnip until he enlisted. Now I see them when I close my eyes and when I open them. There's laughter, but it's the kind born of shared hardship, of marching under endless skies, eating the same bitter root night after night, and finding camaraderie somewhere between misery and mild indigestion. As you lie on a borrowed bedroll staring up at the stars and hearing the occasional burp from a nearby tent, you realize something profound. Victory doesn't taste like glory. It tastes like turnip stew.
You awaken to the clatter of armor and the smell of last night's stew still lingering in the air like a passive-aggressive ghost. The Legion is packing up. You, meanwhile, are headed back to Rome, not for more turnip stew, God forbid, but for something equally spiced and far more entertaining: senatorial rhetoric. Yes, today you return to the Curia Julia, not for policy debates or vegetable legislation, but for a masterclass in the ancient art of oratorical shade, where the real daggers aren't hidden in cloaks, but in metaphors and root vegetable insults. You arrive just in time to catch the end of a speech by one Senator Caecilius Rufus, who is gesturing wildly and comparing his opponent's economic plan to a soggy turnip, soft, bland, and left too long in the sun. The crowd murmurs appreciatively. One scribe raises an eyebrow. The accused senator, Flavius Albinus, smiles thinly because he's been waiting for this. He stands slowly, wraps his toga just so, and begins. And yet, even the turnip, humble though it is, contributes more to the republic than a man who hoards silver like a moth hoards wool. Oh, it's on. You recline discreetly near the back, taking mental notes and enjoying every passive-aggressive turn of phrase. Because in Rome, insults were never thrown. They were planted, carefully, and with just the right amount of seasoning. It turns out that turnip had become a shorthand in Roman oratory. Calling someone a boiled turnip suggested a lack of fire or originality. Pickled turnip meant you were preserved past your prime. Turnip-hearted was, perhaps predictably, a critique of cowardice wrapped in farm produce. One junior senator even coined the term root-witted to describe a rival who responded too slowly during a debate. That one didn't catch on, but you admire the effort.
Historians still argue whether these vegetable metaphors were invented spontaneously or passed around like fine gossip between senatorial circles. Some believe entire families were known for certain produce themes: the lentuli with lentils, the fabae with beans, and of course the rutili. Turnip lovers to the core. You're handed a wax tablet filled with scribbled notes from today's speeches. One reads, "Your logic is as tangled as a root basket. My patience is peeled thinner than a midday market turnip. This bill has more holes than a Gallic turnip net." It's poetry. Bitter, earthy poetry. Later, in a side chamber, you sit among a group of retired orators who now teach young nobles how to sharpen their tongues. One lesson involves developing insult structures using agricultural metaphors. The instructor, a stooped man with a voice like crushed parchment, calls on a student. "Insult me, vegetable only." The student hesitates. Then, You speak like a worm in a turnip, soft, confused, and entirely unseen." The class applauds. The teacher smiles faintly. "Needs more irony, but not bad." In the corner, two boys duel verbally, trading jabs that escalate quickly. "Your logic is half-baked beet pulp. Your honor as shallow as a turnip bowl. At least I'm not a radish wearing a senator's robe." Someone snorts. You walk past scrolls labeled "Vegetal Figures in Rhetorical Warfare," "Agricultural Allusions in Cicero," and one oddly specific pamphlet titled "When to Deploy the Turnip." Rome took its rhetoric seriously. At lunch, a clerk shares his favorite historical moment. During a trial, a senator claimed the accused was so bland even a turnip pitied him. The line reportedly made a praetor laugh so hard he dropped his stylus. There's something oddly soothing about the thought that even the most powerful men in the empire sometimes reduced one another to overcooked produce analogies. Maybe that's what makes Rome feel real. Not the triumphal arches or eagle standards, but the petty brilliance of calling someone a steamed disappointment. Later, you sit by a fountain with a group of scribes reenacting the day's highlights. One does impressions of Rufus holding a carrot like a scroll. Another performs an interpretive dance titled "The Rise and Fall of the Root Metaphor." It is tragically beautiful. As the sun sets over the city's tiled rooftops, you find yourself scribbling your own turnip insult into the dust with a stick. Your thoughts are a side dish at best. You smile. Rome would be proud.
You wake the next morning to the soft clatter of delivery carts and the muffled groans of a city slowly dragging itself back into motion. Rome never really sleeps. It just naps dramatically between episodes of chaos. Today's journey begins with a simple question, echoing through your foggy thoughts like a whispered farewell. What happened to the turnip? You wander the quieter districts of the city, down worn stone roads, past bakeries, bathhouses, and ivy-draped courtyards, searching for what was once everywhere. But something has changed. The turnip, the mighty, mocked, munched-upon root, seems to be fading. At a marketplace near the Aventine Hill, you stop at a stall once famous for its endless crates of turnips. The vendor shakes his head. "Not this year," he says. "Too many spoiled. People want carrots now. More color, more crunch." A group of fashionable young Romans walk by in tunics dyed with imported saffron. One snorts. "Turnips are what my grandfather eats when he's sad." The others laugh, toss their curls, and continue arguing over imported figs. The tide has shifted. In a nearby taverna, you sip thin wine and chat with a merchant who used to trade in vegetables. Once, he says, you could sell turnips to senators for twice the price of onions. Now, they won't even use them in stew.
Everyone wants spelt, lentils. Some are even talking about cabbage. You gasp appropriately. Historians still argue whether the decline of the Roman turnip was purely agricultural, blame shifting soil use and climate changes, or whether it was cultural, a victim of overexposure and satire. Either way, it's happening. You visit the estate of an aging philosopher, Lucius Annius, who once wrote a whole series of essays comparing human virtue to root vegetables. His courtyard is peaceful. A servant offers honey cakes. The old man sighs as you mention the turnip. "Ah, yes," he says, "the noble rapa. It served us well. But people forget what's familiar. That's how fashion works. First beloved, then mocked, then discarded." He waves toward a marble bust, his own, commissioned during the peak of his vegetable-themed writing career. It is, for reasons unexplained, balanced on a carved stone turnip. I tried to revive it once, wrote a play, The Triumph of the Turnip. No one came. One critic called it starchy and uninspired. He wasn't wrong. You spend the afternoon visiting small farms on the city's outskirts. Many still grow turnips, but now in smaller quantities. We use them mostly for animal feed now, or to fill in stew when we run out of real flavor, a farmer tells you, rubbing dirt off his hands. You begin to notice their quiet retreat. No more satirical turnip parades in the forum. Fewer turnip metaphors and speeches. Even the mosaic artists have shifted focus. Grapes, dolphins, and mythological beasts now rule the tile floors. A turnip motif? Too old-fashioned. In a bakery, a boy shrugs when asked if they still bake turnip cakes. "My grandmother used to. People say they're good for digestion, but nobody really asks anymore." Even the tax collectors seem to have moved on. You pass a booth once dedicated to agricultural levies. A new sign hangs out front. Fish Sauce Licensing Office. You sigh. That evening, you return to a quiet garden where once, long ago, or perhaps last week, you watched senators throw shade at one another using vegetable metaphors. Now, the benches are empty. The vines overgrown. A lone cat naps on a sun-warmed tile. You sit and reflect. The turnip had a good run. It fed armies. It sparked debates. It inspired poetry, political feuds, minor rebellions, and one surprisingly moving eulogy for a goat. It sat on silver platters and rotted in side alleys. It wore a crown at Saturnalia and was mocked by philosophers with too much wine. And now? Now it returns to the soil. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. You pluck a lone turnip leaf from the path. The plant is wild now, ungroomed, uncelebrated, but still here. Resilient. You smile, because if there's anything more Roman than an aging empire wrapped in contradictions and crumbling grandeur, it's a vegetable that quietly hangs on whether or not anyone's still paying attention.
You awaken just before dawn, wrapped in your borrowed cloak, somewhere between dreams and the scent of dew-covered earth. The city still slumbers, and for the first time in days, there's no destination, no debate, no senator waving a turnip in righteous fury. Instead, you find yourself wandering the edges of the field of Mars, where the sky begins to blush with the early Roman sun. A few farmers shuffle past with carts full of spring greens, baskets of herbs, and yes, a few turnips, tucked modestly near the bottom like an afterthought. You follow the dusty road away from the city center, past statues worn smooth by time, past public fountains still trickling from cracked spouts, and finally toward a small garden tucked between forgotten temples. And there you find her, an elderly woman kneeling beside a row of vegetables, carefully tending each plant with a curved knife and soft hums that might be lullabies, or prayers, or both. She greets you with a nod
and gestures to a nearby stool. You sit without speaking. For a while, you simply watch. She lifts a turnip from the soil. It's round, humble, purple-shouldered. She wipes the dirt from it with the sleeve of her tunic and places it in a shallow basket already half full. "My mother grew these," she says at last, "and her mother. We called them ground moons." You smile at the name. She continues tending to her plants, telling you how in her youth turnips were always on the table, boiled, roasted, sliced thin with garlic and vinegar. Not because they were fashionable, not because they were funny, but because they were always there. Young people now want dates, or chickpeas, or little things from Egypt they can't pronounce. She shrugs. "That's fine. Things change, but I still like these." You ask if she's heard the old senator jokes, the turnip metaphors. She chuckles. "Oh, those dusty old men and their vegetable insults. My brother used to call me a cracked parsnip when I stole his sandals. I told him he was a raw turnip, and we didn't speak for a week." She laughs until she coughs, and you hand her a cup of water from a nearby jug. She sips slowly, eyes glinting with some quiet mischief. You ask if she thinks turnips will come back. She tilts her head. "Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't matter. They don't need applause to grow." She pats the earth beside her. "Roots are quiet things. They don't ask for attention. They just hold on." The sky brightens. Birds begin their gossip in the fig trees overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a baker lights his oven. Rome stirs. You stand and thank her. She gives you a turnip from her basket, warm from the sun, still cradling flecks of soil. You tuck it into your satchel, nod, and walk slowly back toward the city. And as you move through the awakening streets, past the fountains, the mosaics, the slow-walking philosophers, and fast-talking merchants, you realize your journey has come full circle. Not with a feast, not with a law, but with a gift, a root, a quiet gesture from someone who remembers. The city may forget, the poets may move on, the Senate may find something new to yell about, but somewhere, in a sunlit garden behind a cracked wall, turnips still grow. And now, so do you. So now, dear listener, let your breath soften. Let your thoughts slow. You've walked through centuries tonight, through crowded markets and shadowed villas, through gardens and fields and crowded Senate halls. You've dined beside poets, listened to soldiers grumble, and laughed with philosophers who found meaning in mashed vegetables. And through it all, something humble connected the pieces, a root that asked nothing but soil and time, and maybe a little salt if you were lucky. The turnip, in all its bland, bulbous glory, was never the hero of Rome, but somehow it lingered in every corner, in jokes, in policy, in dinner plates and bedtime stories, a quiet thread running beneath the marble and madness, anchoring an empire in the most unassuming way. Now, as the world outside your window softens into night, or perhaps is just beginning to lighten into morning, allow yourself to root down like that turnip, quiet, steady, content. No need to be grand or clever, no need to perform. Just breathe. Let your shoulders sink, let the weight of the day soften, and each breath guide you deeper into stillness when nothing is urgent and everything just is. You've made it to the end of this gentle journey. Thank you for walking it with me. Now close your eyes and drift into rest, like a turnip returning to the earth.